I didn't know anything was wrong at first. I was just walking home through a quiet street in British Columbia, the kind where the cold air carries every small sound. That's when I saw my friend, Evan, standing outside the same worn-out convenience store we used to visit years ago. He looked frustrated, pacing in circles. I thought it was just a bad night, but then he repeated the same steps. Same turn, same muttered words, almost like a scratched tape looping the same second again. I stopped walking. For a moment, I couldn't tell if my memory was failing or if time itself had slipped. Evan didn't notice me. He just kept going through the same motion, pulling something from his pocket, reading it, shaking his head, then pacing. When he scratched his forehead at the exact same angle as before, I felt my chest tighten. I realized I wasn't watching stress. I was watching time fold in the same place. I should have walked away. If I had, maybe everything would have stayed the way it was supposed to be. But it felt wrong to leave him alone like that. Evan wasn't someone who broke easily, not even on his worst days. Seeing him stuck in that moment, repeating the same pain, felt like watching someone drown in shallow water. I stepped closer, believing I was doing the right thing. When the loop finally broke and he noticed me, he looked surprised, almost relieved. He told me he was fine, but I knew he wasn't. I thought staying with him that night would help. I thought my presence could hold him together for a while. What I didn't understand was that he needed to face something alone, something that would shape who he became. I didn't realize I was interfering with the one moment that was meant to break him, the moment that would have pushed him to change. I didn't know that by stepping into that night, I was dragging him into a different future. I thought I was helping my friend. Instead, I ruined the life he was supposed to have. I didn't plan on stopping that night. I was just trying to get home before the cold settled in deeper, the kind that makes the whole street feel smaller. But after seeing Evan caught in that strange loop, I couldn't just pretend it wasn't happening. We had known each other for years, long enough for me to notice when something inside him had cracked. He wasn't usually the kind who let frustration show. If anything, he hid it too well. That's why watching him repeat the same defeated steps felt so wrong. I walked up to him, pretending it was a coincidence. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. We talked about nothing important at first. Routine things, weather, work, the kind of subjects you touch when both sides are avoiding something real. I kept waiting for him to mention what was happening, or at least react to it. But he didn't seem to remember the loop at all, as if I was the only one who noticed time bending around him. It was supposed to be a short stop, just a moment to check if he was okay. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became that this was one of the worst nights he'd had in years. Something had pushed him to the edge, and he wasn't ready to talk about it. Still, I felt a strange responsibility. Maybe it was nostalgia for the old days, or maybe guilt from the times I wasn't there. Whatever the reason, I decided to stay with him. I thought being present would help him get through it. I didn't know that choice would shift everything. For him, not for me. I didn't know I was interrupting the moment he needed most. Hi, my name is Mark. If you're enjoying the story so far, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue sharing these strange moments that shaped my life. Have you ever tried to help someone and later wondered if you made things better or worse? Thank you for being here. Now let's return to the story. When I look back on that night, what stands out isn't the cold or the empty street or even the strange loop I'd witnessed. What stays with me is how ordinary everything seemed at first. Evan and I had been friends long enough that we didn't need big conversations to understand each other. Sometimes a few minutes standing side by side told more than any long talk could. Maybe that's why I didn't push him right away. I wanted to give him space to find his own words. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit I had seen something impossible happening around him. After a few minutes, we started walking. He didn't say where he wanted to go, and I didn't ask. We just followed the sidewalk toward the waterfront, where the lights from the fishing boats reflected on the dark water. It was a quiet part of town at that hour. Most places had already closed, and the only sounds were our shoes on the pavement and the distant hum of a late bus. Evan shoved his hands in his pockets like he was trying to keep them steady. He talked about work first. He always did that when something deeper bothered him. He told me he wasn't sure how long he'd stay at his job. Too many things piling up. Too many days that felt the same. He used to be proud of what he did, but now he sounded like someone reading the final lines of a chapter he didn't want to finish. I listened, waiting. His voice kept cracking in small ways he probably didn't notice. Before long, we reached an old bench near the harbor. The wood was damp from the cold air. Evan sat, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and stared at the water like it had answers he couldn't find anywhere else. I sat beside him and waited. I didn't want to push. I didn't want to make things worse. At the same time, I felt something building in him. Pressure, tension, the kind that doesn't disappear unless it breaks. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "Like no matter what you do, nothing moves?" I nodded. I didn't know what to say, so I tried to keep it simple. "Yeah, more than once." He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at his reflection in the water. "Tonight? I don't know. Something feels off, like I've been here before, or like the night keeps restarting, you know?" The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just me who noticed the loop. He had felt it too, even if he couldn't describe it clearly. That should have been my warning. The moment that told me I was crossing into something I didn't understand. But instead of stepping back, I leaned in. I moved closer, trying to show I was there for him. "What happened?" I asked. He took a long breath. His shoulders tightened, then dropped. "I made a mistake," he said. "A big one. And I think I've been trying to avoid dealing with it." I waited. He opened his mouth like he might continue, but stopped. His eyes drifted away from the water and toward the dark street behind us, the one we had walked along minutes earlier. And then something strange happened. He blinked, slow, heavy, and for a second, everything around us felt slightly misaligned, like a frame skipping in an old film. I couldn't explain it then. The harbor lights flickered. The cold breeze paused for half a heartbeat. Evan lifted his hand to his forehead in the exact same motion I had seen earlier at the convenience store. The same angle, the same rhythm, the same defeated exhale. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost quiet enough to ignore. But it was the loop again. A second cycle. A repetition of his worst moment. I should have stepped back and let it unfold. I should have trusted that whatever was happening needed to run its course. But seeing him so lost, seeing the loop tighten around him, made it feel wrong to leave him alone. So I did the only thing that felt right to me at the time. I stayed. And that decision, that simple choice to sit beside him, was the first shift in a timeline neither of us understood. Evan didn't notice the repeat. Or if he did, he hid it well. He rubbed his forehead again, shook his head like he was trying to clear fog, and tried to change the subject. But the tension in his voice gave him away. He wasn't just upset. He was avoiding something. I could feel the weight of whatever he carried pressing against the space between us. "Look," he said quietly, "I don't want to unload everything on you. It's late. You should be heading home." "I'm fine," I told him. "I'm here." He didn't argue, but he didn't thank me either. He just stayed in that hunched position, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. That silence between us lasted longer than I expected. Long enough that I started hearing my own heartbeat mixing with the faint sounds of the harbor. A buoy hit the water rhythmically. A door from a nearby building creaked open and shut again. Somewhere a gull called out even though it was nearly midnight. The night felt stretched, like time had been thinned. I kept waiting for Evan to speak, but he didn't. So I asked gently, "What mistake?" He let out a small laugh, not amused, more like someone exhaling frustration. "It's stupid," he said. "Maybe I'm making it bigger than it is." But the loop earlier told me it wasn't small to him. Something inside him was stuck, replaying the same second because he couldn't move past it. "Tell me anyway," I said. He leaned back and rubbed his face with both hands. "I messed up with someone important, someone I care about more than I should." I felt my stomach tighten. Not because of jealousy, nothing like that. Just the heaviness in his voice. He wasn't talking about a simple argument. This was the kind of mistake that reshapes people. "Did you talk to them?" I asked. "That's the problem," he said. "I tried. I made it worse. I keep thinking if I'd handled it differently, maybe things wouldn't be falling apart now." He paused. Something shifted in his eyes, the kind of pain you only see when someone is trying not to break. "I think tonight was supposed to be the moment I finally faced it," he continued. "The moment I stopped running." Those words sat between us like a confession. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease a little, thinking maybe this was the start of him opening up. But then it happened again. A subtle flicker in the lights. The buoy hitting the water in the same rhythm. The gull calling at the exact same moment as before. It was the loop, the third time. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just stress or coincidence. Time was folding around his worst moment, trapping him in the buildup of a decision he hadn't made yet. And instead of letting that moment hit him, instead of letting him face what he needed to face, I was sitting beside him, pulling him away from it without even realizing. He looked up at me suddenly. "Why are you being so quiet?" "I'm just listening," I said. But I wasn't listening, not fully. I was watching the patterns repeat around him like the night didn't know how to move forward without the right trigger. He sighed and leaned back against the bench. "I shouldn't be dragging you into this." "You're not dragging me," I said. "I want to be here." Even as I said it, doubt crept in. Not about staying with him, but about what staying meant. The loops weren't stopping. They were getting longer, stretching around us, wrapping him tighter in the same emotion he was trying to avoid. And each time the night repeated in small ways, I felt like I was standing in the middle of something I wasn't meant to touch. Evan wasn't giving in to the moment. He was escaping it, with me as the escape. If I'd left, maybe the moment would have hit him the way it was supposed to. Maybe the loop would have broken naturally. Maybe he would have faced whatever truth was waiting for him that night. But instead, I stayed. I kept him company. I softened the blow. And the night, the real night he needed, kept slipping further away. We stayed on that bench longer than either of us planned. The harbor lights swayed on the water, shifting with the breeze, and for a while, the night seemed calm again. But it wasn't real calm. It was the kind that forms when something heavier is being held back. Evan sat with his arms crossed now, his shoulders hunched higher, his jaw tense. He wasn't angry. He was bracing for something he didn't want to face. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a long pause. "Of course. When you look at me, do I seem different? I mean, compared to how I used to be." I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how honest he wanted me to be. I could have told him the truth, that he looked worn out, like he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long, or that the spark he used to have was dimmer tonight. But I didn't want to push him deeper into the hole he was already in. "You seem tired," I said gently, "like you've been holding too much inside." He nodded as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "That's what I thought." Another silence settled, this one heavier than the others. Evan breathed slowly, the kind of breath people take when they're trying not to break in front of someone. Then he spoke again. "There's something I should have done earlier tonight, something I've been avoiding." I leaned toward him a little. "What was it?" He looked down at his hands, facing someone I hurt. His voice cracked slightly. He wasn't dramatic or emotional by nature, so even the smallest crack meant something bigger underneath. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was watching a thread unravel that shouldn't be touched. "Why didn't you go?" I asked. He let out a shaky breath. I tried. I walked down the street twice, but I couldn't get past the corner. Every time I got close, something stopped me. I think tonight was supposed to be the night I finally stepped up. His eyes shifted away, scanning the street behind us. I followed his gaze and froze. It was happening again. The same bus turning the corner. The same flicker of the street lamp above us. The same distant sound of a gate slamming shut. The loop wasn't subtle anymore. It was expanding, pulling the same details across a wider stretch of time. Evan didn't react, but I did. For a second, the whole scene felt weightless, like the night itself was stuck waiting for him to make the decision he'd been avoiding. And I was sitting right next to him, blocking it from happening. "Evan," I said quietly, "I think you should go talk to them. Whoever it is, maybe it's time." He shook his head quickly, almost too quickly. "Not like this. Not with everything falling apart." "It's already falling apart," I said. "You said so yourself." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the fear behind his eyes. Not fear of confrontation, but fear of the version of himself that might come after. People don't avoid apologies because they don't care. They avoid them because they know they might have to change afterward. "I don't want to drag you into this," he said again. "You're not dragging me," I repeated. "But maybe this moment, maybe it's important." He swallowed hard. "Important how?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I'd watched him repeat the same gestures and motions 3 times already, like he was caught in a loop. But I tried to explain in the simplest way I could, because running away from something big usually makes it worse. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he exhaled and looked toward the street again. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I don't think I can do it tonight." There it was. The shift. The moment he should have moved forward. The moment the loop was trying to push him toward. And instead of letting him take that step alone, I was there, giving him comfort, giving him escape, giving him a way to avoid it. If I'd stood up then, if I'd left him alone for even 5 minutes, maybe he would have walked down that street and faced the truth he needed to face. Maybe the loop would have ended the way it was supposed to. But I didn't leave. "I'll stay with you," I said quietly. And with those words, the night sealed itself into the wrong version of events, the first real fracture in Evan's future. The night didn't end at the harbor. After a while, Evan stood up without warning and started walking back toward town, and I followed him. His steps were uneven, not drunk or unstable, just lost. He walked like someone trying to outrun a thought that kept catching up to him. Every few minutes, he glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear behind us, but no one ever did. We passed the convenience store again, the one where I first saw him looping. The light above the entrance flickered at the exact same moment it had earlier. I noticed it immediately. Evan didn't. He kept walking, hands inside his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. The loop wasn't repeating the whole scene now, but pieces of it were echoing through the night like a warning I didn't understand. "Do you want to go somewhere else?" I asked him quietly. "Home, maybe, or just sit somewhere warmer." He shook his head. "I don't think I can sit still right now." So we walked, block after block, past rows of old houses and dim streetlights that made the wet pavement shine. British Columbia had a way of holding the cold close to the ground at night, like the chill was part of the air rather than the weather. Evan kept rubbing his fingers together, not from the cold, from nerves. Out of nowhere, he said, "Do you ever get the feeling that something wasn't supposed to happen the way it did?" I slowed down a little. "What do you mean?" He didn't look at me. "Just when you feel like you messed up something that wasn't meant to be messed up, and you don't know how to fix it." I wanted to tell him I understood. I wanted to tell him I could see the weight he was carrying, that I saw time bending around him like it was trying to force him toward something. But at that moment, I didn't want to frighten him. I didn't want him to think he was losing control. Instead, I said, "Everyone's been there at least once." He let out a long breath. "Maybe, but this feels different, like the night isn't letting me move forward." He was right. The night wasn't letting him move forward, but he didn't know why, and I didn't know how to tell him. We reached a street I didn't recognize right away, a narrow block with older houses and a single lamppost at the corner. Evan slowed down, staring at the pavement like he had seen it before. Maybe he had. Maybe he was meant to walk this street alone earlier in the evening. "Was this where you were supposed to go?" I asked. He hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Yeah." The word landed between us, heavy and final. I felt my throat tighten. This was the place. This was the moment he had avoided. The loop hadn't been random. It had been pushing him back here over and over. And now that I was with him, he didn't know how to take the step he was meant to take. He stared at the sidewalk for a long time. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say," he whispered. "I don't even know if they'll open the door." "You won't know until you try," I said. But he wasn't listening to advice. He was fighting himself, wrestling with fear, regret, and maybe guilt. The wind moved through the trees above us, and for a moment, everything felt still. Too still. Like the night was holding its breath. Then, the loop again. A dog barked in the same rhythm as earlier. A window across the street clicked shut. Same sound, same timing. A car passed in the same slow roll. Headlights the same shape and direction. We were standing in the heart of it. The moment restarting, reshaping, waiting for Evan to act. He took one step toward the walkway leading to the house. Just one. His foot touched the first concrete square. Then he froze. "I can't," he said. "Not tonight. I should have stepped back. I should have let the loop do its job. I should have let life break him where it needed to break. Instead, I said, 'It's okay. You don't have to.'" And with those words, the loop softened. Not because it was finished, but because I had stopped it. I didn't know it yet, but the future he needed slipped away right there, on that dim street in British Columbia. We didn't stay on that street for long. As soon as Evan stepped back from the walkway, the tension in his body loosened just a little, but not in a good way. It was the kind of looseness that comes from giving up, not from relief. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and turned away from the house without another word. "Let's just walk," he said quietly. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. My instinct should have pushed me to step aside, to let him confront what the night was trying to force onto him. But instincts fail when you care about someone who looks like they're falling apart. You tend to choose comfort instead of pain, even when the pain is necessary. We walked down the block slowly. The houses grew smaller and farther apart. The streetlight behind us flickered twice more, confirming the loop hadn't stopped, only weakened. It hovered around us, like time was waiting for us to correct something we kept ignoring. "Evan," I said gently, "you don't have to say everything, but if that person was important, maybe running from this is what's hurting you most." He didn't turn his head. "I know. Then why not face it?" He stopped walking. Not dramatically. He just stopped, right on the edge of a driveway, staring at his shoes. "Because I'm not the person they think I am. Not anymore." There was no anger in his words, just a deep tiredness, the kind that grows over years, the kind that settles into someone like a shadow. "You're still you," I said. He shook his head. "No, not tonight." The loop shuddered again around us, not a full reset, but a faint pull. A car in the distance hit the same pothole it had before. A porch light buzzed at the same pitch. The air felt heavier for a moment, like the night was urging him to turn back toward the house he had avoided. But I was still beside him, and he stayed beside me. We walked until we reached a small diner near the edge of town. It was one of those places that stayed open late for shift workers and people who didn't feel ready to go home. The neon sign hummed faintly. The windows were fogged from the heat inside. When Evan looked at it, I saw something shift in his expression, a mix of exhaustion and the smallest hint of relief. "Coffee?" I offered. He hesitated. Then he nodded. Inside, the warmth felt almost overwhelming after the cold outside. Evan slid into a booth near the back, choosing the seat that faced the window. I sat opposite him. He looked around the diner like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. Maybe he didn't, not in the version of the night the loop was trying to create. A waitress came over and poured us coffee without asking what we wanted. She had seen nights like this before, people carrying weight they didn't know how to set down. Evan wrapped his hands around the cup, not drinking yet, just holding it for warmth. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The quiet buzz of conversations from the other tables kept the moment from feeling too heavy. Then Evan finally took a sip and leaned back. "I don't think I'm supposed to be here," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean tonight, this place, this moment. Something feels off, like I took the wrong turn." The hairs on my arms lifted. He felt it too, even if he couldn't explain it. "Maybe it's just stress?" I suggested. He gave me a tired smile. "Stress doesn't make the same second repeat. Something's wrong, Mark." Hearing him say it out loud made everything real. Until then, I'd been holding on to the hope that maybe I'd imagined parts of the loop or misinterpreted them. But he saw it. He sensed the repetition. That meant whatever was happening to him wasn't just in the air. It was inside him, inside the choices he hadn't made. I leaned forward. "Evan, you know that street. You know what you needed to do there." He stared at the table. "I know. Then why didn't you do it?" A long silence passed before he answered. "Because I knew if I walked up to that door, things would change, and I'm not ready to lose who I used to be." His words hit like a cold wave. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He was afraid of the version of himself waiting on the other side of that moment. I didn't know it then, but by sitting with him in that diner, giving him warmth and a place to escape, I was helping him delay a turning point, the exact turning point the loop was trying to deliver. I didn't understand the cost yet, but soon I would. We stayed in the diner longer than I expected. Evan kept nursing the same cup of coffee, letting it go cold without drinking much of it. I watched him stare out the window like he was waiting for something to shift outside. A sign, a reset, anything that would tell him what to do next. The neon sign buzzed faintly above us, and every few minutes the hum would rise and fall in the exact same rhythm. I wasn't sure if that was normal or if the loop had followed us inside. "You ever think," he said suddenly, not looking at me, That maybe some moments are meant to break you, so you figure out who you're supposed to be after? His voice wasn't steady. It trembled in a way he wouldn't have allowed earlier that night. Something inside him was unraveling, and he didn't know how to stop it. I think some moments hurt because they matter, I replied. But you're not supposed to face everything alone. He let out a weak laugh. That sounds nice. But I've been avoiding that moment for months, maybe longer. What happened between you two? I asked gently. He closed his eyes. I changed. That's the short version, and I don't think they liked who I became. I wanted to tell him that people change all the time, that it didn't mean he was broken. But the truth sat between us like a shadow. Whatever had happened, he believed he'd ruined something important, and tonight was supposed to force him to confront it. He opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. I think I was supposed to go to that house tonight, he whispered. Not because it would fix everything, but because it would force me to stop hiding. The Loop wanted the same thing. I felt it. He felt it. But neither of us knew how to face what came after, and I kept giving him a place to hide by sitting across from him. He looked up and studied my face. Why did you follow me? The question caught me off guard. Because you seemed like you needed someone. His expression softened in a sad way. Maybe I did, but maybe that's the problem. I frowned. How? He took a slow breath. If you weren't here, maybe I would have walked up to that door. Maybe I would have let tonight happen the way it was supposed to. He didn't say it accusingly. He wasn't blaming me. He was stating a fact, one I felt like a punch in the chest. Before I could respond, a shadow moved across the window as a car passed outside. And then I heard it again. The same distant horn, the same buzz from the neon sign, the same man's voice from a table nearby repeating the same joke. The loop wasn't subtle anymore. It wrapped around the diner like the world was trying to rewind the night and offer Evan another chance to do what he needed to do. But he stayed seated, and I stayed with him. Evan, I said slowly, if you want to go, I'll walk with you. You don't have to be alone. He shook his head, eyes glossing slightly. Not tears, just exhaustion so deep it almost looked like defeat. No, that's the point. I can't go with you. That's not how this works. He was right, and I hated that he was right. Then I'll wait here, I said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mark, if you stay, I'm not going. My breath caught. I hadn't expected him to say it so plainly. He pulled his hands away from the coffee cup and pressed them flat against the table. I needed to feel the bottom tonight. I needed to hit it hard enough to wake up, and instead, you're here, keeping me from falling. I felt something cold spread through me. I'm not trying to stop you from being better. I know, he said softly, but that's exactly what's happening. The diner lights flickered. The loop tightened again. Time was waiting for him to choose. He stood up suddenly. I need air. I followed him out of the booth without thinking. The cold hit us hard when we stepped outside, the kind of cold that shocks the breath out of you. Evan stopped on the sidewalk, hands on his hips, staring at the street like he expected a version of himself to appear and make the decision he couldn't. This night wasn't supposed to go like this, he whispered. He didn't know how right he was. I didn't either. Not yet. But soon we were about to learn what happens when you step into the one moment someone was meant to face alone. We stood outside the diner for a while, letting the cold soak into our coats. Evan had his hands on his hips, eyes fixed on the empty street like he was waiting for something to arrive. An answer, a memory, a version of himself he could finally understand. The neon sign behind us kept flickering in uneven pulses, and every time it buzzed louder, I felt something familiar. The loop pressing against the edges of the night again. Evan took a slow breath and wiped his palms against his jeans. I think the night is circling me, he said quietly, like it's waiting for me to make the move I keep avoiding. You don't have to force it, I told him. You'll know when you're ready. He turned his head just enough to look at me. That's the problem, Mark. If I wait until I'm ready, I'll never do it. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. They had the same unfocused tension he'd carried all night, as if his mind was split between the moment he stood in and the moment he was supposed to reach. A few cars passed in the distance. No loop there, nothing repeating. So for a moment I thought maybe the night was loosening its grip. But then the same gust of wind rolled down the street, pushing the same newspaper across the pavement, stopping in the same spot near a storm drain. The loop hadn't ended. It had followed him here, "Do you want to walk again?" I asked. He nodded and started moving without another word. I walked beside him, matching his pace. He kept his hands tucked inside his coat like he was trying to keep himself together. The streetlights ahead of us flickered in sequence, almost as if guiding him back toward the part of town he'd avoided earlier. And then he said something that made my stomach twist. "I think I ruined who I was supposed to be." I slowed down a little. "That's not true." "It is," he said. "I've been dragging this mistake behind me for months, and tonight, I think I was supposed to finally face it. I can feel it, like I'm on the wrong version of my own life." The honesty in his voice hurt. He wasn't being dramatic. He was describing the timeline shift in the simplest way he knew how. We reached a bus stop with a dim overhead light, and Evan stopped to lean against the metal frame. He closed his eyes and breathed steadily, as if the cold air helped him stay upright. "What happened exactly?" I asked softly. He pressed his lips together before answering. "I hurt someone who trusted me. I didn't mean to, but I did, and instead of fixing it, I disappeared into myself. I avoided them. I convinced myself they didn't want to hear from me again." He opened his eyes. They were red but dry. Evan wasn't the type to cry in front of anyone, not even me. "I kept telling myself I'd talk to them eventually," he continued. "But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And tonight, I think this was supposed to be the breaking point. The night I finally stopped running. Every word felt like a stone being placed gently between us. Heavy, deliberate, real. "You still can," I said. "The night isn't over." He shook his head. "It is for me. You being here, it changes it. I can't do it with you watching." I stepped back a little, guilt hitting me unexpectedly. "You want me to go?" He hesitated. "No, yes, I don't know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm stuck between wanting help and needing to fall apart on my own." Before I could respond, the loop triggered again. Same bus sound in the distance. Same metallic clank of the diner's back door closing. Same dog bark from blocks away. The night wasn't letting go. It was waiting for him. It was repeating the signal. "This is the moment. Move." But Evan didn't move, and I stayed beside him, anchoring him to the wrong version of the night. After a long silence, he stepped away from the bus stop and kept walking. The wind picked up again, colder now, pushing against our backs as if urging us forward, or pushing us somewhere we didn't belong. "I think I'm supposed to face this alone," he whispered. Those words should have made me step back, but I didn't. I kept walking with him, staying at his side, unaware that I was pulling him further from the path the night had been trying to lead him toward. And the timeline, and his future, shifted a little more with every step we took together. We walked for several blocks without speaking. The cold grew sharper, pushing us toward the center of town, where the lights were brighter and the streets less empty. Evan's steps slowed as we got closer to the busier area. He kept looking down, avoiding the windows we passed, avoiding the reflections of himself. It was almost painful watching him try so hard not to break. People assume breaking is loud, but most of the time it's quiet. Just a shift in someone's posture, the tremble of a breath, the way they hold their shoulders. Evan looked like someone holding back the collapse of a world only he could see. We crossed into a quieter block again, this one lined with older shops closed for the night. The signs creaked softly in the wind. Evan stopped near a bookstore with a dusty window display. He stared at the books like they were memories he had forgotten. "I used to come here," he said softly, "before everything changed." I didn't ask what changed. I already knew. It was the thing he wouldn't say, the mistake he carried, the apology he owed but never gave. The loop wasn't happening because he'd made a small error. It was happening because his future depended on what he did tonight, and he hadn't done it. "I should have handled things differently back then," he murmured. "I should have listened more. I should have said something sooner." "Everyone makes mistakes," I said. "This one mattered," he insisted. "This one either shaped me, or it was supposed to." He turned from the bookstore window and looked down the street. The wind lifted his hair slightly, and in the dim yellow glow of the street lamp, he looked older than 33, not in a physical way, but in the weight he carried. Then something strange happened. A shadow passed us, someone walking behind. But when we turned, the street was empty. The sound of footsteps repeated, same pattern, same rhythm, arriving from nowhere. I felt a chill run through my spine. The loop wasn't just echoing events, it was echoing people, moments, possibilities. Evan shoved his hands deeper into his coat. That's the third time I've heard that, he whispered. Those steps. I nodded slowly. I heard it too. He stared at the pavement, his shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Mark, what if I'm stuck because I didn't do what I was supposed to do? What if time is just waiting for me? His voice was small, almost childlike. It doesn't work like that, I said, even though I wasn't sure. Time doesn't choose people. Then why does tonight feel like it's repeating? He asked. Why does it feel like something's pulling me back to the same place over and over? I didn't have an answer. Neither of us did. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Every loop, every echo, every repeat was centered on him, not me. I was only witnessing it. He took a few steps forward, then stopped again. I was supposed to go back to that street, he said. I know it. I can feel it. Then let's go, I offered. His head snapped toward me. No, he said sharply. Then softer. That's not how it works. I have to go alone. The wind blew through the alley beside the bookstore, carrying the faint scent of cold and wet pavement. Evan looked down that alley like he expected an answer to appear from the darkness. Why didn't you go earlier? I asked. He hesitated, his breath visible in the cold. Because the moment I admit I messed up, I have to choose who I'm going to be after. And I'm not sure I'll like that version. He rubbed his hands together again, same motion he'd done countless times tonight. The loop nudged the air around us again, subtle, almost gentle this time, as if giving him another chance. But he didn't move, and I didn't step away. Instead, I said, you don't have to do everything on one night. Maybe it doesn't all have to happen right now. He swallowed hard. That's the thing, Mark. I think it does. He didn't cry, but his voice wavered. Tonight was supposed to hurt. It was supposed to wake me up. And I realized something that made my chest tighten. I had been shielding him from the pain he needed. I had been helping him avoid the moment he was meant to face. I had been interfering with his timeline without even knowing it. Evan closed his eyes for a moment. The wind paused. The street buzzed with the same flicker as earlier. This isn't the night I was supposed to have, he whispered. He didn't know that he was right. But I did. Finally. Fully. And still. I stayed beside him. We left the bookstore block and wandered through another quiet street. Evan didn't say where we were going. He didn't seem to have any direction at all, like he was drifting inside the night, carried by whatever remained of the loop. His movements had changed. Earlier, he walked with the tension of someone trying to outrun something. Now he walked like someone who no longer believed the night had anything left to offer him. And maybe that was the real danger. The loop wasn't pushing him anymore. It was following him, weakening with each step he took in the wrong direction. A bus passed by slowly, its interior lights dim. I watched it go, realizing it was the same model, same sound, same slow roll from earlier. But something about it felt different this time. Not wrong, just out of place, like the echo of a moment that had already been used up. Evan didn't look up to see it. Instead, he stopped near a small community park. The playground was empty, the swings moving gently in the cold breeze. Evan leaned against the metal railing and stared at the empty swings, like they held some answer he'd been searching for all night. I don't feel like myself, he said quietly. Not the version of myself I was supposed to be. The weight of his words made something tighten in my chest. You're still you, Evan. He shook his head. I don't think so. I think that version was supposed to start tonight, and I didn't let it happen. The truth he had been circling all night finally surfaced. This night wasn't meant to be a pause. It was meant to be a turning point. I think this was the night I was supposed to hit rock bottom, he admitted. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to wake up. The cold bit at our faces. I tried to focus on his words, tried to understand how we had arrived at this point. All night I had been trying to keep him steady, trying to keep him from falling apart, trying to make sure he wasn't alone. But now I could see the mistake, the fundamental misunderstanding that had shifted everything. He wasn't supposed to be held together. He was supposed to break, just enough to rebuild himself. The loop wasn't punishing him. It was giving him a chance, and I had pulled him away from it every time it tried to bring him back. I shouldn't have followed you, I said quietly before I could stop myself. Evan looked at me surprised. Why? Because maybe you needed space tonight. Real space. He swallowed hard. Maybe. But I didn't ask you to leave. No, I said. But you didn't ask me to stay either. The wind shifted again, and the same loose chain on the swing set clinked twice in the same pattern. Another echo of a moment misaligned. Another reminder of what the night wanted from him. Evan pushed off the railing and started walking deeper into the park, onto a small path lined with bare trees. I followed a step behind, not beside him this time. I could feel it, the emotional distance growing between us, as real as the physical distance between our footsteps. He stopped beneath one of the trees and looked up. The branches swayed overhead, creaking softly. "I was supposed to go back to that house earlier," he whispered. "I was supposed to knock on that door." I didn't move. I didn't speak. For once, I didn't interfere. Evan lowered his head and looked at the path ahead of him. "I think I'm stuck because I avoided the part of the night that mattered. And now, there's nothing left to push me there." The loop was fading. I could feel it. The echoes, the repeated sounds, the repeated lights were softer now, more distant, no longer pulling him toward the right version of the night. Time had stopped nudging him because he had drifted too far from the moment that needed him. "I think the chance is gone," he said. I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist there was still time. But his voice had the finality of someone who knew, deep down, that certain moments don't wait forever. He looked at me, not angry, not blaming, just sad. "This wasn't the night I needed," he said. "This was the night I chose instead." And the worst part was realizing he wasn't wrong. The night had split in two, and we were walking the wrong version of it. We left the park without deciding where to go next. Evan walked ahead of me now, not far, just enough that I wasn't at his side anymore. It wasn't distance made of anger. It was distance made of exhaustion. He looked like someone who had spent all his strength just holding himself together, and now he was running out of pieces to keep doing that. The streets grew quieter as we moved farther from the center of town. The lights here were dimmer, spaced wider apart, and the sidewalks glistened from a thin layer of frost forming on the edges. Evan's breath came out in uneven clouds as he walked, and every few steps he'd pause like his thoughts weighed too much to carry. I stayed behind him, finally understanding that being too close wasn't helping. Maybe it never had. We turned a corner into a residential street lined with small houses. Lights glowed faintly in a few windows, and I wondered how many people were inside dealing with their own regrets, their own mistakes, their own nights that wouldn't let them rest. Evan stopped near a wooden fence and pressed his hand against it, steadying himself. "I feel like I'm drifting," he said, barely above a whisper. "You're not," I answered, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. He looked over his shoulder. "Everything tonight feels disconnected, like I keep stepping into the wrong version of the same moment." I didn't respond. He was describing exactly what the loop had been doing, offering him the right moment again and again, each time softer than the last, and I had guided him away from it every time. A car rolled down the street toward us. Same model, same pace as one we saw earlier, but the headlights didn't flicker this time. The detail that had once repeated perfectly now moved freely, no longer echoing the loop. The timeline wasn't trying anymore. The door had closed. Evan saw it too. "It stopped," he said quietly. I nodded. He put both hands on the cold wooden fence, leaning his forehead against it. His shoulders trembled just once, a small sign of collapse he quickly tried to hide. He took a deep breath, then let it out slowly, like he was trying to release everything inside him but could only manage pieces. "It feels like I missed something important," he said. "Something I can't get back." The truth sat in my throat like a stone. I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to answer without admitting what I finally understood. He had missed it, and I had helped him miss it. "Do you think," he started, "that some nights decide who you become?" I stepped closer but stayed a few feet away. "Yeah, I think some nights do. And if you walk away from that moment, you walk away from the version of yourself you needed to be." His voice didn't break, but his posture did. I watched his back curve inward, his shoulders fall. Not dramatically, just enough to show that something inside him had shifted for good. He looked down the road, toward the direction of the house he never went back to. "I should have gone there, even if it was hard. We all avoid things," I said softly. He shook his head. "Not like this. I think tonight was supposed to be the line between who I've been and who I needed to become." He turned slowly, leaning against the fence now instead of bowing over it. His face was pale under the streetlight, his eyes tired and unfocused. "You being here," he said, voice steady but fragile. It made it easier to hide. It felt like a reason not to go, like an excuse. The words weren't meant to hurt. They didn't even sound like blame. They sounded like a realization, the kind you get only after the moment you needed has already passed. "I didn't know," I said. He nodded once. "I know you were trying to help." The cold wind brushed past us, carrying the faint smell of the sea. Evan stepped away from the fence and stuffed his hands back into his coat pockets. "Let's keep moving," he said. "I don't want to stand still." But when he walked away, his steps were heavier. I followed him again, not beside him, not guiding him, just trailing behind, watching the night close around the version of him that would never get the chance to become who he was meant to be. And for the first time, I wondered if staying with him had changed more than just the night. Maybe it had changed everything. We walked for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. Evan kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, but his steps had lost all direction. It was like he wasn't trying to get anywhere anymore. He was just moving because stopping meant facing the truth he'd been pushing away all night. The loop had faded almost completely now. No repeating footsteps, no flickering lights, no echoed moments. The world felt heavier, more linear, as if the night had accepted that he wasn't going to do what it needed him to do. That acceptance was worse than the loop itself. We reached an industrial area near the edge of town. Warehouse buildings, empty lots, the hum of distant machinery. It wasn't a place people wandered through unless they had a reason. Evan didn't. He just walked until he reached a loading ramp and sat down on the concrete, folding his arms across his knees. I stayed a few steps away, giving him the space he'd been trying to create all night. For a while, he didn't say anything. His breath came out in short, uneven bursts, and the wind pushed his hair gently across his forehead. Finally, he spoke, staring at his boots. "You know what the worst part is?" I waited. "I knew tonight was coming," he said. "I felt it building for weeks, maybe months. That pressure, that feeling that you can't keep pretending everything's fine." He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. "I kept telling myself I'd fix things eventually, that I'd apologize, that I'd own up to what I did, but I never did. I just kept waiting for the right moment." He looked up at me then, eyes tired, voice steady. Tonight was the moment. The wind moved across the empty lot, carrying dust and cold air with it. There was no loop this time, no repeated cues, nothing forcing him to turn around and make the right decision. Just the raw truth of a night slowly ending in the wrong direction. Evan let out a humorless laugh. "It's strange. I think the universe tried to give me a chance, show me what needed to happen, but I didn't take it." He paused, then added quietly, "I couldn't take it. Something inside me pulled tight." "You weren't alone," I said. "I was with you." He lowered his gaze again. "And maybe that's why I couldn't fall apart the way I needed to. I couldn't break in front of someone who cares about me." The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't cruel. They weren't an accusation. They were just honest, an honesty I wasn't prepared for. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know," he said, "and that's what makes this so complicated." The night felt colder now, not because the temperature dropped, but because the truth between us had no warmth left in it. He was right. He needed to hit bottom. He needed to feel the consequences of the mistake he'd avoided for so long. And I, without meaning to, had softened the fall that was supposed to change him. He leaned back against the metal ramp, head tilted upward as if looking for something in the dark sky. "I think helping me tonight came at the wrong time," he said. "Not because you meant harm, but because you kept me from facing myself." A long silence stretched between us. For the first time, I didn't try to fill it. After a while, Evan stood up slowly, brushing the dust off his coat. His movements were heavy, but deliberate. "The night's almost over," he murmured. "I can feel it." I looked toward the horizon. The sky was still dark, but thinner somehow. Less like night and more like the last few hours before dawn. "What happens now?" I asked. He shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden. I just go back to the version of myself that doesn't learn what he needed to learn tonight." He gave a faint smile, one that hurt more than anything else he'd said. "Maybe that's my future now." I took a step forward. "You don't know that." "I do," he said softly, "because tonight wasn't supposed to be easy, and I made it easy." He started walking again, and this time I didn't follow as closely. The distance between us grew step by step, until he looked like a shadow moving along the dimly lit street. For the first time, I understood the extent of what I had changed. He didn't need comfort. He didn't need company. He needed the version of the night I'd helped him avoid. And now the night was gone. Evan kept walking ahead of me, though slower now, almost as if the weight of the night was settling across his shoulders. The air smelled like the sea again, cold, bitter, and sharp. We were moving back toward the older part of town, where the houses were spaced farther apart and the streetlights flickered in long, tired stretches. I could tell he was choosing roads without thinking, following whatever path felt emptiest. At one point, he stopped near a row of mailboxes and sat on the curb. Not dramatically, not in defeat, just quietly, like someone who had run out of reasons to keep moving. I sat a few feet away, giving him the distance he needed. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be after tonight," he said softly. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say without making things worse. "I spent so much time trying to keep everything from falling apart," he continued, "trying to manage things, manage myself. But now I think maybe I needed tonight to remind me what happens when you don't face the truth." He looked down at his hands, turning them palms up like he was studying something he didn't recognize. "This version of me," he said, "wasn't meant to last." That line hit hard, not because he was wrong, but because he finally understood exactly what he'd been running from. "I'm not angry at you," he added. "You didn't know. But I changed the night," I said quietly. Evan gave a small nod. "Yeah, you did." The honesty hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that didn't need anger. He wasn't blaming me. He was just acknowledging reality, something he had spent the whole night avoiding. A car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights sweeping across the mailboxes in a familiar pattern. It wasn't a loop, just an echo, the last remaining thread of a timeline that had given up on pulling him back. The repetition was so weak now that if I hadn't experienced the stronger versions earlier, I might have missed it completely. Evan noticed it too. "It's almost gone." "What is?" "The thing that kept repeating," he said. "It feels like it's fading, like the night stopped expecting anything from me." I didn't know what to say. The sense of quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was final. He stood slowly, brushing the dust from his coat. "Do you know what scares me the most?" he asked. I shook my head. "That I'll wake up tomorrow and nothing will feel different. Not because things got better, but because I never gave myself the chance to change." There was no bitterness in his voice, just exhaustion. Deep, painful exhaustion. We kept walking until we reached a small hill overlooking part of the harbor. From up there, the lights reflected across the water like broken pieces of a memory. Evan leaned against the railing, staring at the boats, swaying gently in the dark. "When I think about the path I avoided tonight," his voice trailed off. He swallowed hard. "I think I was meant to hit the bottom there, to let the night break me a little, to finally face what I did." He shook his head. "But I stayed with you, and that's not your fault. I needed you earlier in my life, just not tonight." There it was, the truth neither of us had wanted to name. He didn't resent me. He didn't blame me. He just understood, far too clearly, that I had softened the one moment that was supposed to change him. "I don't know what version of my future we're walking into now," he said quietly, "but I'm starting to think it's the weaker one." He pushed himself off the railing and stood in front of me. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired, resigned. "Whatever comes next," he said, "I think I have to face it alone." I nodded. "If that's what you need." He gave a faint smile, sad but grateful. "It is." We stood there for a long moment without speaking. The wind moved past us, and for the first time since the loop began, nothing repeated, nothing echoed, nothing nudged him. The night was no longer correcting him. It had accepted the wrong version. When Evan finally turned and walked down the hill, he didn't look back. His figure grew smaller under the streetlights until he disappeared behind a row of houses. And as I stood alone by the harbor, I finally understood the full weight of my decision. By trying to protect him, I had taken away the night he needed to rebuild himself. I had ruined his future, not with malice, but with kindness in the wrong moment. I didn't follow Evan down the hill. I just stood there for a long time, watching the empty harbor and listening to the faint hum of a distant generator near the docks. The cold air tightened around me, sharper than it had been earlier, as if the night itself had shifted in temperature once Evan stepped out of the frame it had been holding for him. The loops were gone. The echoes were gone. Everything that once repeated now moved forward without hesitation, as if the world no longer cared about the moment we'd missed. Eventually, I started walking home. The streets felt different, not unfamiliar, but stripped of the tension they'd carried all night. The loops had given the night a strange rhythm, an undercurrent of pressure. Now there was only stillness, a heavy, indifferent stillness that pressed against my ribs. When I reached my apartment, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the front steps, staring at the dark windows across the street. I kept thinking about the house Evan had avoided, the door he never walked up to, the conversation that would never happen. Somewhere in the city, someone was ending their night unaware that a version of their future had quietly disappeared because of a choice Evan didn't make, because of a choice I helped him avoid. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him walking down that hill, shoulders curved inward, carrying a weight he wasn't meant to carry. I kept replaying the night in my mind. Not the version we lived, but the version that should have happened. The version where I let him face it alone. The version where he walked to that door, took a breath, and finally confronted the truth he'd been hiding from. I saw it so clearly that it felt like a memory, one from a timeline I no longer belonged to. The next morning, the light coming through my window felt duller, as if even the day carried some leftover weight from the night before. I made coffee but barely drank it. Eventually, I forced myself outside, hoping fresh air would clear my head. When I walked through town, nothing seemed different at first. People went about their routines. Cars passed in their usual patterns. Shops opened at their usual times. But there was something subtle under the surface, a shift I felt but couldn't immediately name. It wasn't until I passed the bookstore from the night before that I finally felt it. Evan wasn't there, of course, but something about the street was quieter, not physically, emotionally. Like the space where the loop had once pressed against him was now hollow, emptied. I headed toward his apartment without thinking. When I reached the building, I hesitated at the door, wondering whether I had any right to check on him after everything. But I needed to know if he made it home safely. I needed to see if he was okay, or at least the version of okay he could be now. He opened the door on the third knock. His eyes were puffy, but not red. His face looked drawn, as if he'd gone years without sleep instead of a single night. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He looked different. "Hey," he said, voice flat. "Hey," I replied. "Just wanted to check in." He nodded slowly and stepped aside to let me in. His apartment was quiet, too clean for someone who didn't sleep well. He sat on the couch and stared at the floor while I remained standing. "How are you?" I asked. He let out a breath that carried no emotion. "I don't know yet." "Did you sleep?" "A little," he said. "Enough to feel the weight of it." He rubbed his hands together the same way he had the night before, but it looked different now, less anxious, more resigned. "I'm not mad at you," he repeated like he'd rehearsed the line in his head. "I know," I said. He lifted his eyes to mine. "I think something closed last night, and whatever was supposed to open, didn't." The sentence cut through me like ice. He leaned back against the couch. "It feels like I skipped a step I wasn't supposed to skip, like I'm waking up in a version of myself that wasn't ready." I didn't know how to respond, and for the first time I realized this wasn't just about last night. It was about every version of the future that would come after. We sat in silence for a long time. Evan didn't move much, except to rub his palms together or shift his feet slightly. I could tell he was trying to hold himself steady, but even that seemed like a struggle. There was something in his posture that hadn't been there before, something fragile, like a small fracture running through the center of him. "I keep thinking about that door," he murmured finally. "I keep seeing it in my head. Not the conversation, not what I was supposed to say, just the moment before knocking." I sat down on the chair across from him. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight behind his words. "What stopped you?" I asked. He breathed in slowly. "Fear and comfort. The combination is deadly." He folded his hands together, tightening them until his knuckles whitened. "I wasn't supposed to have comfort last night. I see that now. I was supposed to feel the full weight of what I'd done. And instead, I got the one thing that made avoiding it easier." His voice didn't crack. It didn't rise or fall. It was flat, steady, like someone reciting a truth that had already settled deep inside them. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "If I made things harder, you made things easier." He interrupted. "That's the problem." Another silence stretched out between us. I could feel the shape of it, heavy, unspoken, filling the room like fog. He leaned back on the couch and pressed the heel of his hand to his forehead. "Do you know what I felt when I woke up this morning?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing." He dropped his hand and stared at the floor. Just nothing. No urgency, no push, no pull, no echo of what needed to be done. The feeling I'd been carrying for months, gone, like my mind reset without me. That was the consequence. Not a dramatic collapse, not a visible spiral. A quiet, devastating reset. A future now locked into the wrong track. He wasn't being punished. He was being emptied, and that emptiness would carry forward. "What does that mean for you?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "I don't know. I guess it means I move on, without the change I needed." He rubbed his face again, this time slower. "I'm not going to fix things. That door is closed now, literally and figuratively, and I don't think I'll ever have the courage again. Whatever was pushing me, it's gone." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Evan, you can still try. Tonight doesn't have to define everything." He gave me a tired stare. "But it does. That's how these things work. There's a window when you're brave enough, or scared enough, to face something. If you miss it, you live with the version of yourself that comes after." He stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Not to make anything, just to move. He placed his hands on the counter, head low, shoulders pulled inward. "I'm going to be honest, Mark. I don't know what comes next for me. I don't know if I'll get better or if I'll get stuck even deeper in who I am now." I stood slowly. "You're not alone." He gave a faint, sad laugh. "I know, and that terrifies me even more." He turned around, leaning against the counter. "You being here means I won't collapse, but maybe I needed to collapse." His voice softened. "Maybe holding me up last night pushed me into a version of myself that stays stuck longer." His honesty felt like a weight pressing into my ribs. "You didn't choose wrong," he added, almost as an afterthought. "You just didn't know what the night needed from me. And now, I have to live with it." He walked back to the couch, lowering himself into the same position he'd held earlier. The morning light from his window stretched across the floor, but it didn't brighten the room. It just revealed how tired he looked. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "If you hadn't seen the loop, would you still have followed me?" I hesitated, but the answer was there, clear and undeniable. "Yes." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something important. "Then I guess the loop didn't make the choice. We did." And there was nothing left to say after that. The version of Evan sitting in front of me wasn't broken. He was simply unfinished, incomplete in a way the night should have corrected, and I was the reason it didn't. I stayed with Evan for a while longer, though neither of us spoke much after that. The silence between us wasn't tense. It was the kind that forms when two people finally understand something they can't undo. Each minute that passed felt like the night was drifting farther away from us, sealing itself behind a closed door we'd never be able to open again. When I finally stood to leave, Evan didn't try to stop me. He just nodded once, a slow, weary nod, and walked me to the door. The morning light outside was pale, barely cutting through the thin clouds hanging over the neighborhood. British Columbia had that particular kind of gray that makes everything look softer and heavier at the same time. As I stepped out onto the landing, Evan leaned against the doorframe. "You'll check on me, right?" he asked, voice low. "Of course." He looked down at his feet. "Just don't try to fix anything, not anymore." That sentence lingered in the air longer than anything else he'd said all morning. "I won't," I replied. He nodded and closed the door gently. Not a slam, not a hurried goodbye. Just a quiet, tired ending to a night that had spiraled into the wrong future. I walked home slowly, feeling the weight of the previous night settle across my shoulders like a cold coat I couldn't take off. The streets looked normal again. No loops, no echoes, no repeated details. The world was steady, moving forward, indifferent to what had happened. But I wasn't indifferent, and I knew Evan wasn't either. Over the next few days, I saw the change in him more clearly. He went to work, but not with the same focus. He avoided certain streets, Not because they held bad memories, but because they reminded him of the version of himself he should have become. He didn't talk about the person he had hurt. He didn't talk about the night. He didn't talk about the loop. He didn't talk about anything that mattered. He functioned. That was all. People can live entire lives while being stuck. I was watching him begin one. A week passed before he finally called me. His voice sounded tired, thinner, like it was stretching from farther away than before. "Do you want to grab dinner?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. We met at a small diner, not the same one from the night of the loop, but another one across town. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. Evan didn't want reminders, and I didn't blame him. He looked fine on the surface. He talked about work. He asked about my week. He even laughed once, though it didn't reach his eyes. But underneath the small talk, something important was missing, something vital to who he used to be. "The window's closed," he said suddenly, once the conversation drifted into a quiet lull. I didn't pretend not to know what he meant. And now I guess I'm supposed to figure out what to do with the version of myself that's left. "That doesn't mean you can't grow," I offered gently. Evan shook his head. Not the way I would have. Not the way I needed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defeated. He was simply resigned. "I'm not blaming you," he repeated. "I wouldn't have faced it alone anyway, but the loop tried. It tried to push me, and I didn't listen." I looked at him across the table, and for the first time, I understood what the loop had been trying to give him. Not a punishment, not a curse, not a supernatural warning, just a chance. A narrow, painful chance to correct the path he was on, and we'd walked away from it together. When we finished dinner, he thanked me for meeting him and headed home. I watched him walk down the sidewalk, shoulders slightly hunched, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He looked like someone carrying the shape of a past he couldn't return to, and a future he no longer believed in. I walked in the opposite direction, feeling the cold seep through my jacket. Every step felt heavier than the last. Some nights give you the chance to become someone new. Other nights take that chance away. And sometimes you don't realize which kind you're living until it's too late. I didn't ruin Evan's future out of cruelty or neglect. I ruined it because I cared, and because I stepped into a moment that wasn't meant for me. The timeline didn't break loudly. It broke quietly, with kindness in the wrong place, and we were both going to live with that. I still think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. Not because of the loop or the strange repetitions or the way time folded around Evan. Those things faded, like distant echoes from a place I no longer have access to. What stayed was something quieter. The weight of realizing that sometimes the smallest decisions can shift the path of someone's life in ways you never intended. Evan kept moving forward in the weeks that followed, but not in the way he should have. He settled into a kind of life that looked normal from the outside. Steady job, familiar routines, quiet evenings. But underneath it all, there was this subtle emptiness, a dullness in the way he spoke about the future, a hesitation that never fully left his voice. He didn't talk about the person he was supposed to apologize to. He didn't talk about the night that should have broken him. He didn't talk about the loop, and I never brought it up either. Some subjects feel too fragile to touch, like handling them might shatter the thin layer of stability someone is trying to build. But every time I saw him, I could feel the gap, the absence of the version of him that might have existed if he'd faced the truth that night, if I'd let him walk that path alone. If I hadn't stepped into a moment meant to force him towards something harder, sharper, necessary. I still don't know if the loop was trying to teach him something or if time just misaligned for a moment and showed me what could have been. Maybe it doesn't matter. All I know is that we walked away from the version of him the night tried to create, and he became someone else, someone I still care about, someone still trying, but someone carrying the shape of a change that never came. I see him sometimes, and I wonder quietly who he might have been. But the timeline that held that answer is gone now, and neither of us can go back.